Debra Winger may be starring in Patriot, but I hope what I'm about to say doesn't make her think I am a total traitor. Here's what, Debra Winger, the time has come for you to play.
What happens when a woman in Hollywood refuses to smile on cue, to flirt for camera, or to say yes when everyone expects her to? In the 1980s, Debra Winger was a force, 2 Oscar nominations, box office hits, and a raw intensity that lit up the screen. Debra Winger was once hailed as one of the brightest stars of 1980s Hollywood, a woman whose acting could ignite a scene with just a glance or a well-placed line. Within only a few years, she had earned 2 Oscar nominations for An Officer and a Gentleman in Terms of Endearment, and was being compared to legends like Jane Fonda and Meryl Streep. Directors from across the globe sought her out, recognizing her fierce talent and raw authenticity. But just as quickly as she rose, Winger disappeared from the spotlight. There was no scandal, no career-ruining role, no public meltdown, only an uncomfortable silence surrounding her name. Hollywood insiders whisper the same word over and over: difficult. Yet, that single label hid a far more complex reality. Debra Winger's Hollywood story isn't about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's about a woman who refused to conform to an industry that demanded women obey and remain grateful. Her clashes weren't random tantrums. They were deeply rooted in a refusal to be objectified, controlled, or reduced. Her career was filled with friction, often misunderstood as arrogance, but was her way of preserving her truth in a world that tried to rewrite it. Her career truly took off in 1980 with Urban Cowboy, where she starred opposite John Travolta. Off-screen, their chemistry became personal, but it was a relationship defined as much by turmoil as by passion. From their first meeting, Winger sensed something unsettling. Travolta began their interaction not with kindness, but with questions that struck her as subtly judgmental, asking if she was Jewish and whether she'd gone to college, followed by an inappropriate sexual remark. Still, the chemistry was undeniable, and they began a volatile relationship. During one scene, Travolta was supposed to fake slap Winger's character. Instead, he hit her with real force, breaking one of her teeth. He didn't apologize. Instead, he proposed to her shortly after. Winger declined. Without rage or drama, she simply walked away, recognizing the moment a relationship shift from attraction to control. Her next major film, An Officer and Gentleman, paired her with Richard Gere and led to another Oscar nomination. Yet, for Winger, it was an emotionally barren experience. She called Gere a brick wall, handsome and distant, a partner who gave her nothing to work with between takes. Gere later admitted the tension existed, though he never elaborated. Director Taylor Hackford and producer Don Simpson exacerbated the environment, treating Winger with contempt rather than respect. Simpson even told crew members she wasn't affable enough for the lead, reducing her worth to her appearance. Winger was pressured to take diuretics to make her face look slimmer on screen, an order that came not from a doctor, but from men in power trying to mold her into their image of beauty. When she refused to perform a scene she felt compromised her character's integrity, the production halted. Hackford was furious, but later, he admitted she was absolutely right, though no apology was ever offered. Winger's instincts, once validated, were still unwelcome. The industry labeled her difficult, not for poor behavior, but for having boundaries, opinions, and artistic integrity. Her male counterparts could walk off set, demand rewrites, and still be called geniuses. Winger did the same and was painted as trouble. Her resistance didn't stop with directors. In the early 90s, she was cast in A League of Their Own, a story she cared deeply about. She trained for months with the Chicago Cubs, committing herself fully to the role. Then Madonna was cast. Winger didn't object publicly or throw a fit. Instead, she quietly exited the project. Later, she said the film shifted from a serious historical narrative to something more commercial, like an Elvis movie. She didn't begrudge Madonna the role, but she refused to lend her talents to something that no longer honored the story she had originally committed to. Her critique was sharp but restrained. "I think Madonna's film career speaks for itself," she later said, cutting, but without theatrics. Her legendary tension with Shirley MacLaine on Terms of Endearment has become Hollywood lore. On screen, they played mother and daughter with powerful realism. Off screen, they clashed in every way. Winger, younger and defiant, showed up to set in combat boots and short skirts, while McClane embodied classic Hollywood grace. One infamous moment captured their dynamic. Winger missed her mark. McClane called it out, and Winger stormed off, lifted her skirt, and allegedly farted in McClane's direction. McClane confirmed it in her memoir, and Winger never denied it. Their conflict wasn't rooted in hatred. It was mutual resistance, two strong personalities unable to yield to one another. When McClane won the Oscar, she accepted it with a pointed, "I deserve this," a line that, though not directed at Winger explicitly, carried weight. Still, Winger respected her co-star. "We never had lunch," she said, but there was respect like boxers after a brutal match. In The Sheltering Sky, Winger faced a different challenge. John Malkovich, a man she described as a runway model disguised as an actor. To Winger, Malkovich's performance felt artificial, like he was performing at her rather than with her. She believed in grounded, spontaneous, honest performances, and his cool, introspective style was like acting into a void. She never masked her feelings, saying outright that she didn't know who she was even talking to in scenes with him. While some speculated it was jealousy, others understood. Winger rejected anything that felt fake, and with Malkovich, the connection was never there. Winger's resistance to compromise earned her enemies, but also solidified her as a symbol of defiance. Director James Bridges once halted production because Winger refused to do a scene. Upon review, he admitted she was right, again, but being right didn't matter. Not in an industry where female compliance was expected. She didn't play the Hollywood game, didn't charm the press, didn't soften her edges, didn't tolerate hypocrisy. She said what she felt, acted with conviction, and walked away when something betrayed her artistic or personal standards. By 1995, Winger had had enough. Standing in a quiet field in Ireland with her husband, she turned and said, "I'm done." She didn't announce a retirement or stage a comeback. She just quietly stepped away, choosing a life of family, small theater work, and introspection. She didn't leave Hollywood because she failed. She left because it no longer offered her anything of value. No new roles, no meaningful stories, and no space for her unyielding honesty. Debra Winger didn't self-destruct. She didn't succumb to fame, addiction, or scandal. She simply refused to be complicit in a system that expected her to bow her head. In a town that celebrates male auteurs who speak their minds and fight for their vision, she was punished for doing the same. The industry branded her impossible. But what really made her dangerous was that she couldn't be controlled. She didn't fake charm, didn't flatter weak directors, and never pretended mediocrity was acceptable. Her silence when asked about past collaborators like Travolta, her minimalistic critiques of stars like Madonna or Malkovich weren't rooted in bitterness but in clarity. She had lived the truth and had no desire to relive the pain for public entertainment. And though she may have vanished from the spotlight, she never truly left the cultural imagination. Today, when younger actresses speak out about mistreatment, pressure, and control, they're often supported by a new wave of awareness, hashtags, and solidarity. Winger had none of that. She fought her battles alone, armed only with her voice, her convictions, and a refusal to be anyone but herself. That legacy, one of quiet courage and principled resistance, is what lingers. So if anyone asks why Debra Winger didn't make it in the traditional sense, the better question is, what did making it really mean? Was it staying silent, obeying unjust men, performing femininity for approval? Or was it, as Winger proved, walking away when you know your worth? Her story isn't about being difficult. It's about choosing dignity over obedience, freedom over fame. And in Hollywood, that's the rarest kind of success there is. Debra Winger's exit from Hollywood wasn't a vanishing act. It was a conscious decision by a woman who had stared directly into the machinery of the film industry and said, "Not like this." In the decades since, her story has often been told as a cautionary tale about what happens when a woman is too bold or too outspoken. But that telling flattens her into a caricature. What Winger endured, and more importantly, what she resisted, tells us something crucial about the era she worked in and the unspoken contracts between actresses and power. She entered the industry during a period of transition. The The 1970s had ushered in the new Hollywood wave, gritty, director-driven films full of realism, imperfection, and anti-heroes. But even as filmmaking grew more ambitious and political, women were still expected to be beautiful, compliant, and silent. You could be talented, but not too difficult. You could have opinions, but only if they didn't threaten the director's ego. Winger came onto the scene just as these contradictions were beginning to explode. She didn't arrive through the expected routes. No pampered starlet backstory, no modeling career, no family dynasty. Winger's intelligence, her working-class sensibility, and her often acerbic wit set her apart. She wasn't trying to be America's sweetheart. She was trying to tell the truth, through her roles, through her words, through her mere presence. That's what made her so powerful and so dangerous in the eyes of an industry still addicted to control. Even Winger's acting style felt like a rebuke to Hollywood's glossy standards. She didn't hide emotions under perfectly delivered lines or studio-tweaked glamour. Her performances in films like Terms of Endearment or Shadowlands were messy, lived in, and deeply human. There was a vulnerability in her characters that often made audiences feel like they were watching someone crack open on screen. That kind of authenticity can't be faked, and it can't be directed into submission either. And yet, her honesty came at a cost. Off-screen, she refused to play nice if something felt false. When asked to appear on talk shows or do promotional fluff, she often declined. When scripts felt hollow or insulting, she walked away. And when co-stars or directors disrespected her, she didn't absorb it in silence like so many others. She confronted it. That assertiveness, particularly from a woman, was interpreted not as strength, but as insubordination. Look at her clash with John Travolta. In a post, #MeTooWorld. It's impossible to overlook the implications of their relationship, the imbalance of power, the lack of accountability, the real violence behind the scenes masquerading as passion. When Travolta struck her during a scene, breaking her tooth, and didn't even stop to apologize, it should have been a scandal. But instead, it became one of those buried Hollywood legends, softened by time and omission. Winger's refusal of his proposal wasn't just romantic rejection. It was a rejection of the idea that a woman should submit, forgive, and move forward for the good of production. Likewise, her contentious working relationship with Richard Gere was a prime example of two performers who couldn't connect. But it was Winger who was blamed for frostiness. Even Gere later admitted the tension was real. Winger owned her side of it. She confessed that her own insecurities made her quick to anger, that she sometimes took her frustration out on others. But there was no malice, only a relentless hunger for sincerity, a refusal to act like everything was fine when it wasn't. Her experiences with producers like Don Simpson were not isolated incidents. Simpson was one of the many powerful men in the industry who saw women not as collaborators, but as props to be positioned, altered, and sometimes humiliated. His comments about Winger's face being too puffy, his insistence that she take diuretics, weren't just cruel. They were an attempt to reduce her worth to how well she fit the male gaze. Winger didn't cave to these pressures, but she didn't go on a press tour to fight them either. She resisted quietly, with grit, even when it cost her. Perhaps that's why her exit feels so radical in retrospect. In a world where most actresses claw to stay relevant, to hold on to youth, to remain visible, Winger walked away before the industry could write her off. She didn't fade. She chose not to fade. She didn't spiral into tabloid hell or pivot into sitcoms or reality shows. She simply turned her back on the system. She moved to New York. She raised her children. She performed on stage, away from the cameras. She read books. She lived. And now, decades later, the culture is finally catching up to what Winger was trying to show us all along. We're in a moment when actresses are reclaiming their voices, speaking out about the abuse, coercion, and silencing that once seemed inevitable. Winger lived that fight without a movement to support her. There was no social media, no Time's Up, no fan army to defend her from producer slanders. All she had was her voice, and she used it the best way she knew how. Not for applause, but for truth. In many ways, Debra Winger was ahead of her time. Today, an actress with her fire might be celebrated for refusing toxic roles, for walking away from misogyny, for demanding depth in her characters. But in the 80s and 90s, that same behavior earned her blacklist, whispers, and ultimately a kind of exile. And yet, she remains. Even after decades out of the spotlight, people still asked about her. She left before Hollywood could strip her of her mystique. And because she never sold out, never softened her convictions for a paycheck or a photo op, she stands as one of the few figures from her era who didn't just survive, she transcended. Winger once said in an interview, "I don't need to be forgiven. I didn't do anything wrong." And that sentence, so simple and defiant, encapsulates her legacy. She didn't break down. She didn't play along. She didn't apologize for being smarter, louder, or more intuitive than the men who tried to direct her. So what does it mean to be labeled difficult in Hollywood? Sometimes it means you're difficult to silence, difficult to mold, difficult to exploit. And when we reframe that narrative, when we recognize that being difficult often just means having boundaries, we begin to see Winger not as a cautionary tale, but as a pioneer. There are moments when artists become more than their filmography, when their lives and choices echo far beyond their IMDb page. Debra Winger is one of those artists. She reminds us that the greatest strength sometimes lies not in how long you stay in the game, but in the moment you choose to walk away with your soul intact. If her story made you feel something, anger, admiration, or even reflection, share it in the comments. These stories matter more than ever. And if you're drawn to the untold, the uncomfortable, and the unforgettable, hit that subscribe button.